You ever break your back doing something incredible for your family, something you know they will never forget, something that should make them proud of you, only to have them turn around and treat you like an afterthought, like you don't even matter? That's exactly what happened to me, and let me tell you, I still remember the exact moment I realized just how little I meant to them, how easily they could throw me aside without a second thought, without hesitation, without even the courtesy of pretending to feel guilty about it. For 2 years, I worked harder than I ever had in my life, scraping together every spare dollar, cutting back on anything that wasn't a necessity, refusing to let myself have even the smallest luxuries because I had a plan, a dream, a gift that I knew would make my parents happier than anything else in the world. My parents, Robert and Diane, were obsessed with Italy for as long as I could remember, always talking about the history, the food, the culture, the beauty of the countryside, the romance of the canals in Venice, the grandeur of Rome, the vineyards in Tuscany where they always imagined themselves walking hand in hand in the golden afternoon light. It was their dream, something they always said they would do someday when they had time, when they had the money, when things weren't so complicated. But someday never came, and year after year, it remained nothing more than a fantasy. A story they told themselves to feel better about the fact that they had never actually made it happen. So I decided to do it for them. I saved up enough money to buy 3 first-class tickets to Rome, booked luxury accommodations in Florence, Venice, and the Amalfi Coast, planned an itinerary full of private tours, exclusive dining experiences, and once-in-a-lifetime adventures that I knew they would love. I didn't do it because I wanted recognition, or because I was trying to prove anything. I did it because I loved them, because I wanted to give them something that would make them truly happy. The night I finally told them was supposed to be special. I invited them over for dinner, cooked their favorite meal, poured expensive wine into the good glasses, set the mood with soft music and warm lighting, trying to make the moment feel just as grand as the gesture itself. When they arrived, they were in a great mood, laughing and reminiscing about old family vacations, telling the same stories I had heard a million times before. I waited for the perfect moment, savoring the anticipation, imagining their excitement, picturing their shocked but overjoyed expressions as I pulled out the envelope with the tickets and set it down on the table in front of them. For a second, everything was perfect. My mom gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief, while my dad leaned in closer, pulling out the tickets and reading them as if he couldn't believe they were real. My heart swelled with pride, with joy, with a simple satisfaction of knowing I had done something truly good, something that would mean the world to them. They started asking questions, wondering how I had pulled it off, saying they couldn't believe I had done something so generous, so thoughtful. I told them about the hotels, the tours, the reservations I had made at restaurants they had always dreamed of visiting, the surprises I had planned along the way to make every single moment unforgettable. And then something changed. It was subtle at first, just a glance exchanged between them, something small but sharp enough to cut through the warmth of the moment like a blade against my skin. My dad cleared his throat, my mom hesitated before speaking, something heavy settling in the air between us, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up before I even understood what was happening. They thanked me again, a little too carefully, a little too measured, and then my mom, with a voice as gentle as if she were delivering bad news to a child, said something that made my entire world tilt sideways. "This is really amazing, Ethan," she said, placing her hand on mine as if to soften the blow before it even landed. "But we were actually thinking it might be better if Lily came instead." At first I thought I had misheard. The words didn't make sense, didn't compute, didn't fit into...
Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The moment I had so carefully crafted in my mind. I let out a confused laugh, shaking my head, waiting for them to clarify, to say something that would make it all make sense. "What?" I asked, still smiling, still convinced that this was some kind of misunderstanding. My dad sighed, looking at me the way he always did when he thought I was being difficult. "Lily could really use this trip," he said, as if that explained everything. "She's been so stressed lately with everything going on in her life, and you know how much she's always wanted to go to Italy too." Lily, my younger sister, their golden child, the one who could do no wrong, who had spent her entire life being praised, excused, and handed things she never had to work for. Lily, who had a bad habit of making terrible decisions and expecting everyone else to clean up the mess. Lily, who somehow always managed to be the center of attention, no matter the occasion. "You're kidding," I said, my voice flat, my stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. "We just think it would mean so much to her," my mom continued, smiling as if this was the most natural, reasonable thing in the world. "You know how much she's been struggling, and this could be exactly what she needs to reset, to get back on track." I stared at them, my brain struggling to keep up, trying to find some kind of logic in what they were saying. I paid for this trip, I finally said, my voice shaking just enough to betray the anger bubbling beneath the surface. I planned everything. This was my gift to you. And it's a wonderful gift, my dad said. His voice calm but firm, the way it always was when he had already decided something and wouldn't be changing his mind. But, Ethan, you don't really need this trip. You're stable, you have a good job, you're doing fine. Lily needs it more than you do. Something inside me cracked, something deep, something old, something that had been waiting for this exact moment to finally break. I looked at them, at the parents who had raised me, who I had spent my whole life trying to impress, trying to be good enough for, and realized, with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt, that I never would be. I don't remember much of what I said after that. I remember standing up, walking away, hearing my mom calling after me. Her voice tinged with disappointment, as if I was the one being unreasonable, as if I was the one ruining a beautiful moment with my selfishness. I remember driving home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to understand how it had all gone so wrong. And then, hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification, and when I looked down I saw a photo. A smiling selfie of my parents and Lily, standing in front of the airport gate, boarding passes in hand, ready to embark on the dream vacation that I had given them. Without me. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my phone screen, the glow of it casting sharp shadows across my hands as I held it too tightly, my knuckles aching from the pressure. The photo was still there, frozen in time, my parents and Lily standing in front of the airport gate, grinning like this was the happiest moment of their lives, as if nothing was wrong, as if I didn't even exist. I should have deleted it, should have turned off my phone, should have done something to stop myself from staring at it over and over again, dissecting every detail, every smug expression, every hint of joy on their faces while I sat here, alone, wondering how I could have ever been so stupid as to think that I mattered to them in the same way they mattered to me. The anger that had been simmering inside me since last night started to grow, stretching and twisting itself into something darker, something deeper, something that wasn't just about this one moment but about every moment that had come before it, about every time I had been pushed aside, every time I had been told to be the responsible one, the understanding one, the one who didn't make a fuss because Lily needed more, because Lily deserved more, because Lily was special and I was just there. I could remember it all so clearly now, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, revealing a picture I had spent my whole life trying to ignore, pretending it wasn't as bad as it really was, convincing myself that I wasn't being left behind on purpose, that it wasn't favoritism, that I was just imagining things. But I wasn't. I thought back to when we were kids, how Lily could do absolutely anything and still be showered with praise while I had to work twice as hard just to get a nod of approval. When she threw a tantrum at the toy store because she wanted something she couldn't have, my parents caved within minutes, handing it over with smiles and laughter like her behavior was adorable instead of embarrassing. But when I asked for something, when I tried to get even a fraction of the attention she received without even trying, I was met with lectures about being grateful for what I had, about understanding that money didn't grow on trees, about how I should set a good example because I was the older brother and that's what older brothers were supposed to do. It never changed, not even as we got older. When I studied hard, got good grades, worked my ass off to make something of myself, I was met with lukewarm compliments, polite nods, the occasional "we're proud of you," that felt more like a formality than genuine pride. But when Lily barely scraped by, when she made mistake after mistake, when she needed to be bailed out of yet another bad decision, they treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world, their baby girl who could do no wrong, who just needed a little more help, a little more love, a little more of everything she had already taken from me without a second thought. And now, here I was 35 years old, still the one who gave, still the one who sacrificed, still the one who got nothing in return except the realization that I had never actually mattered to them as much as I had let myself believe. The thought of it made my stomach turn, my jaw clench, my fingers dig into my palms so hard my nails left red crescent marks on my skin. I needed to talk to someone before I completely lost my mind. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, driving to the only person who had ever been honest with me about my family, the only one who had seen through their bullshit long before I was ready to admit the truth to myself. Mark had been my best friend since college, the kind of friend who never sugar-coated things, who told me exactly what I needed to hear even when I didn't want to hear it. He opened the door before I even knocked, taking one look at me and shaking his head as he stepped aside to let me in. "Let me guess," he said, walking toward the kitchen as I dropped onto the couch. "They left you behind and didn't even pretend to feel bad about it." I let out a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand over my face, exhaustion settling deep into my bones. "Not only that," I muttered, leaning back against the cushions. "Lily is in business class, and I'm sure she's already acting like she owns the damn plane." Mark snorted, pulling 2 beers from the fridge and tossing one to me. And you're surprised because... I don't know, I admitted, twisting off the cap and taking a long drink. I guess I thought, just this once, they'd actually appreciate what I did for them instead of treating it like something they were entitled to. Mark took a seat across from me, shaking his head. They've never appreciated you, Ethan, he said bluntly, no hesitation in his voice. Not the way they appreciate her. And I hate to say it, but that's never gonna change. I exhaled sharply, setting the bottle down on the coffee table with a little more force than necessary. So what the hell am I supposed to do? Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Get revenge, he said, his voice casual, like he was suggesting something as simple as ordering takeout. Make them regret ever thinking they could walk all over you. I laughed, shaking my head, but there was something in my chest, something dark and tempting, something that whispered maybe, just maybe he was right. Revenge, I repeated, still smiling, still pretending like I wasn't seriously considering it. And what exactly would that look like? Mark smirked, raising an eyebrow. That depends. How far are you willing to go? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my stomach tightening when I saw Lily's name on the screen. I hesitated for only a second before answering, my voice flat, emotionless. What do you want? Her laugh was light, almost musical, the way it always was when she knew she had gotten her way. Just wanted to check in on you, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I mean, I feel kind of bad that you're missing out on all of this. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Oh, do you? She sighed, the sound exaggerated, dramatic. Well, I mean, you probably wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway, she said, and I could hear the smirk in her voice, the smugness, the sheer arrogance of someone who had never faced a single consequence in her entire life. Italy is more my kind of place, you know? Something inside me snapped. I didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't waste another second listening to her gloat. I hung up without a word, my hands shaking as I set the phone down, staring at it like it had just personally betrayed me. Mark watched me closely, waiting, not saying a word. I looked at him, my mind suddenly clear, my decision already made. I pulled my laptop onto my lap, my fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, searching, planning, setting things in motion. Mark grinned. So, what's the plan? I reached for my phone again, dialing a number I hadn't called in years, waiting as it rang, my pulse steady, my resolve unshaken. Hey, I said when the voice on the other end answered. I need a favor. The moment I ended the call, a strange sense of clarity washed over me, as if something that had been tangled inside my mind for years had suddenly unraveled, leaving nothing but sharp, focused purpose in its place. I had spent my entire life letting them walk over me, letting them make decisions that benefited themselves at my expense, letting them pretend that their love was unconditional when, in reality, it had always been a transaction, a careful balancing act where Lily's happiness came first and my needs were nothing more than an afterthought. But this time things were going to be different because this time I wasn't just going to sit back and take it. They wanted a dream vacation, a once-in-a-lifetime, perfect getaway where they could bask in their own selfishness without a second thought for the person who had made it all possible. Fine. They could have their trip. But I was going to make damn sure it was one they would never forget. I cracked my knuckles, opened my laptop and got to work. The first thing I did was pull up the confirmation email from the hotel I had booked for them, a 5-star luxury resort in the heart of Florence, the kind of place that catered to wealthy tourists who wanted to feel pampered while pretending they were immersing themselves in Italian culture. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice and called the front desk, waiting patiently as the automated system connected me to a human voice. Good evening, this is Hotel Bella Vista. How may I assist you? I put on my best imitation of my father's voice, the firm but polite tone he always used when speaking to people he deemed beneath him, the slightly impatient edge that let them know he expected to get what he wanted without any hassle. Yes, hello, I said, keeping my words slow and deliberate. This is Robert Sullivan. My wife and I had a reservation under our name, but unfortunately we need to cancel. Something urgent has come up, and we will no longer be able to make the trip. There was a brief pause, a hesitation that told me the hotel clerk was checking their system. Ah, Mr. Sullivan, I see your reservation here, she said, her voice warm and professional. I do want to inform you that, per our cancellation policy, there is a non-refundable fee for cancellations made less than 48 hours in advance. That won't be an issue, I interrupted smoothly, forcing a light chuckle. I completely understand. Just go ahead and process the cancellation for me, and we'll take care of whatever charges apply. A few more clicks, another polite confirmation, and just like that, their hotel reservation was gone. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. That was step 1. Next, I logged into my mother's email, which I had memorized years ago when she asked me to help her set up her phone and never bothered to change the password afterward. I scrolled through her inbox, quickly locating the confirmation email for one of the guided tours I had booked. An exclusive high-end experience that included a private chef, wine tastings at top-tier vineyards, and a sunset cruise along the Amalfi Coast. It had been one of the more expensive parts of their itinerary, something I had justified at the time because I wanted them to have the absolute best. But now it was going to be something else entirely. I found the contact information for the tour company, crafted a polite but firm email in my mother's name, and made a simple request. Rather than canceling the tour, I wanted to upgrade it. I requested premium add-ons, additional courses for their private dinner, an extended yacht rental with champagne service, and a personalized shopping excursion with a local stylist. All non-refundable. All charged to their credit card on file. By the time I finished, I could practically hear my father's voice in my head, the sharp intake of breath he always made when he realized something had gone horribly wrong, the gritted teeth, the quiet but seething anger when he was forced to deal with a problem he couldn't immediately fix. I could picture my mother wringing her hands, her voice turning high-pitched and anxious, desperately trying to reason with the tour company while my father raged in the background. The thought of it filled me with something dangerously close to glee. But I wasn't finished yet. For the final touch, I went online and signed my father up for an exclusive wine club, the kind that catered to wealthy collectors who wanted rare, high-end bottles delivered to their doorsteps. The membership fee alone was astronomical, and the first shipment, 6 rare vintages, each worth more than my monthly rent, would be billed immediately. There was no way to cancel it without forfeiting the entire deposit, and there was absolutely no chance my father would ever admit to the company that he had been scammed into signing up for something he had never actually wanted. His pride wouldn't allow it. By the time I finished setting everything in motion, my stomach hurt from laughing. The first call came the next morning, just as I was finishing my coffee. "Ethan." My mother's voice was tight with panic, her words rushed. "Something is wrong with our reservation. The hotel says we don't have a room, but I know you booked it." I let out a confused hum, setting my mug down with exaggerated slowness. "That's weird," I said, keeping my tone light, curious. "Did you call and confirm before you left?" "Of course we did," she snapped, frustration creeping into her voice. "But they're saying it was cancelled, and they don't have anything else available at the moment. We're trying to figure out what to do, but everything nearby is either booked or way too expensive." "Wow," I said, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. "That really sucks, Mom. I wish I could help." The second call came an hour later. "Ethan, did you change something with the tour?" my father demanded, his voice sharp with suspicion. "We just got an email saying there were some additional charges added to the itinerary, and when I tried to dispute it, they said the request came from your mother's email." "That doesn't make sense," I said innocently, widening my eyes as if he could see me playing dumb. "You think maybe she accidentally upgraded something without realizing it?" There was a long pause, filled with the kind of silence that told me he was grinding his teeth so hard it was a miracle they didn't crack. By the time the third call came in, I was already grinning before I even answered. "Ethan." Lily's voice was sharp, accusing. "Did you do something to Dad's credit card?" I took my time responding, letting the anticipation build before finally speaking. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice as smooth as silk. "But hey, didn't you say I wouldn't have enjoyed this trip anyway?" The sound of her indignant gasp was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. That night, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through my laptop, another notification popped up on my screen. A restaurant charge, thousands of dollars, a fancy Michelin-starred place in Rome, had been declined on my father's credit card. I leaned back, stretched my arms behind my head, and smiled to myself. Let the games begin. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drenching the cobblestone streets of Florence as my parents and Lily stood huddled under a small awning, their luggage piled at their feet, their clothes soaked through despite their attempts to shield themselves from the relentless downpour. My mother clutched her phone in one shaking hand. Her other pressed against her forehead like she was trying to will away the migraine I knew had settled in. My father, jaw clenched so tightly it looked like his teeth might shatter, kept pacing back and forth, occasionally pulling out his wallet and stuffing it back into his pocket as though doing so would somehow fix the situation. And then there was Lily, arms crossed, soaked hair clinging to her face, fury written in every tight muscle of her body as she glared at them both like this was entirely their fault, like she had somehow been dragged into this mess against her will. For the third time that evening, my father approached the front desk of the boutique hotel they had desperately tried to check into. His voice louder than it had been before, the thin veneer of patience cracking under the weight of exhaustion and frustration. "There has to be some mistake," he said. His voice rough with barely controlled anger. His hands gripping the counter as the young receptionist stared at him with practiced neutrality. "We booked a room here. We paid for a room here. We were told everything was confirmed. And now you're telling me we don't have a reservation." The receptionist, a young Italian man with a carefully polite expression, offered my father the same response he had already given twice before. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but according to our system, the reservation was cancelled earlier this week. I'm very sorry, but we do not have any available rooms at this time. Perhaps another hotel. Do you think I haven't already checked?" My father snapped, slamming his fist against the counter hard enough that my mother flinched. "Every hotel in the area is booked solid, and the ones that aren't are charging twice the rate we originally paid." The receptionist, clearly unfazed by the outburst, merely nodded with the same carefully neutral expression. "Again, sir, I am very sorry. There is nothing I can do." My mother let out a choked sob, her composure crumbling as she turned to my father with wild, pleading eyes. "What are we supposed to do?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of sheer exhaustion. "We've been walking for hours, Robert, hours. I can't do this anymore. I need to sit down. I need a break. You need to calm down," my father said sharply, rubbing a hand over his rain-soaked face before pinching the bridge of his nose. "Lily, check your phone. See if you can find anything that isn't outrageously priced. There has to be somewhere we can go." "Oh, you mean like the last 5 places we tried?" Lily snapped, her voice dripping with venom as she pulled out her phone anyway, her thumbs moving furiously across the screen. "Because that's been working so well for us so far." My father exhaled sharply, his patience hanging on by a thread. "Lily." "No," she cut in, her anger finally boiling over, her eyes blazing with fury. "This is your fault. You and Mom were so damn sure about coming here, so sure about taking my ticket instead of Ethan's, and now look at us. I bet if he were here, this wouldn't have happened, because at least he knows how to plan a trip." At that, my father's face darkened, his jaw tightening in a way that made it clear she had hit a nerve. My mother let out a quiet sob, wiping at her already ruined mascara, but Lily wasn't finished yet. "And don't even get me started on the damn tour," she continued, waving her phone in front of them both. "Because apparently you booked the premium experience with a non-refundable upgrade, so guess what? We're being charged for it whether we go or not. We don't even have a hotel room, but hey, at least we have an overpriced wine tasting." My mother buried her face in her hands, my father stood in stunned silence, and Lily, having run out of breath, finally fell back against the wall, her face twisted in a combination of rage and exhaustion. And then, at long last, my phone rang. I had been waiting for this moment, watching their suffering unfold in real time through the updates they didn't realize they were giving me every time they messaged the family group chat or posted their location by accident. I took a slow sip of my coffee, let the phone ring twice more, then finally picked up, making sure to sound groggy when I answered. "Hello, Ethan." My father's voice was tight, controlled, the way it always was when he was trying not to yell. "We need your help." I frowned, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Wait, what's going on? You're in Florence, right? How's the hotel?" My mother made a strangled noise in the background, and I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. "There is no hotel," my father bit out. "There was a mistake, the reservation was cancelled, and now we have nowhere to stay." I let out a low whistle, clicking my tongue against my teeth. "Wow, that sucks," I said, drawing out the words like I was really thinking about it. "I mean, I double-checked all the bookings before you left, so everything should have been fine when I planned it." Silence. A long, tense silence. Then, slowly, carefully, my father asked the one question I had been waiting for. "Ethan," he said, his voice cold, clipped, dangerous. "Did you do this?" I let the silence stretch just a second too long, just long enough for doubt to creep in, just long enough for him to know without me actually confirming it. And then, with the calmest, most infuriating tone I could muster, I simply said, "Dad, why would I do that?" I could almost hear the way his hand clenched into a fist, the way his teeth ground together in frustration, the way his patience snapped in real time. My mother was crying harder now. My father's breathing had turned sharp and erratic, and Lily was muttering a string of furious curses under her breath. They were miserable, stranded in a foreign country with no backup plan, no safety net, no one to swoop in and fix things for them like they had expected. And yet, the best part hadn't even happened yet. Because as they finally gave up and dragged themselves to the airport, hoping to book an early flight home, something else was waiting for them. Their passports, for some inexplicable reason, had been flagged as suspicious. They were about to be detained for questioning. And I, sitting comfortably in my dry, warm apartment, smiled to myself as I watched the notifications roll in. This was only the beginning. The moment they stepped off the plane, their clothes rumpled from the long flight, their expressions etched with exhaustion and barely contained rage, I knew they had been through exactly the kind of hell I had intended for them. My father's face was flushed with anger. His jaw set so tight I thought his teeth might crack under the pressure, and my mother looked absolutely drained, her eyes puffy from crying, her hands clenching the straps of her handbag like she was holding on for dear life. And then there was Lily, who, for the first time in her life, didn't look smug, didn't look victorious, didn't look like she had just effortlessly landed on her feet after yet another disaster she had walked into with that spoiled confidence she had carried since childhood. No, Lily looked shaken, looked small, looked like she had finally realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't untouchable after all. I had made sure they suffered, made sure they felt every single ounce of what it was like to be stranded, humiliated, helpless, unable to rely on anyone but themselves. I had made sure they understood what it felt like to have everything fall apart when they least expected it, to have plans unravel in the worst possible ways, to be trapped in a nightmare of their own making. And now, as they walked through the airport terminal, dragging their luggage behind them, their movements stiff and filled with barely restrained fury, I could see the exact moment their eyes landed on me, standing there, waiting for them with my hands casually stuffed into my pockets, my face the perfect mask of calm indifference. My mother was the first to react, her breath hitching in her throat as she let out a quiet, broken sob, the sound raw and jagged, like she had been holding it back for hours, for days, for the entire trip that had spiraled so catastrophically out of control. She took a step toward me, her lower lip trembling, her hands reaching out like she wanted to grasp onto me, as if I was suddenly supposed to be her comfort, her safe place, after everything they had done. "Ethan," she gasped, her voice hoarse, her eyes filled with a desperation I had never seen before. "Oh my God, Ethan, it was awful, it was." Before she could finish, my father stepped forward, his eyes dark with fury, his hands clenched into fists at his sides as he exhaled sharply through his nose, the veins in his temple pulsing with the barely restrained anger coursing through him. His face was red, his shoulders tense, and when he spoke, his voice was low and cold, filled with something dangerous, something that warned me that whatever thin thread of control he was still clinging to was fraying fast. "You," he bit out, his words clipped, his tone deadly, his hands twitching like he wanted to grab me by the collar and shake the smug look off my face. "You did this." I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion, pretending like I didn't already know exactly what he was talking about, like I hadn't been waiting for this moment with the patience of a man who had spent years being overlooked and was finally taking his turn in the spotlight. "Did what?" I asked, keeping my voice light, unconcerned, unaffected. "I wasn't there, remember? You and Mom made sure of that." My father's entire body stiffened, his knuckles whitening as he gritted his teeth hard enough that I could almost hear it. He took another step closer, his presence looming, his anger radiating off of him in waves, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. "You ruined our trip," he growled, the words laced with venom, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might make him lose what little self-control he had left. "Everything was a disaster. The hotel, the tour, the charges on my credit card, the detainment at the airport, the fines, the humiliation. You orchestrated all of it." I shrugged, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, keeping my posture relaxed, my expression unreadable. "That's weird," I mused, tapping my chin like I was deep in thought, like I was pretending to consider the possibility that I had somehow been responsible for their suffering. "Everything was perfectly fine when I planned it. I made sure everything was booked, confirmed, taken care of. But I guess things changed after I wasn't invited." Lily inhaled sharply, and for the first time since they had arrived, she actually looked nervous, her fingers tightening around the handle of her suitcase, her shoulders hunching slightly like she wanted to make herself smaller, like she knew she had played a role in this mess but wasn't quite sure what the consequences would be yet. She darted a quick glance at our father, then back at me, and for the first time in her entire existence, she didn't have some flippant remark, didn't have some sarcastic, snide comment to brush off responsibility. My mother let out another sob, shaking her head, her hands gripping her chest like she was on the verge of collapse. "Ethan," she whimpered, her voice pleading, her eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to guilt, something that might have meant something to me if I didn't already know better. "Ethan, why would you do this to us? We're your family." I let the silence stretch, let the words settle in the air between us, let the weight of them hang there, heavy and suffocating, before I finally responded, my voice quiet, even devoid of any of the emotion they had long since beaten out of me. "It wasn't my trip to ruin." The moment the words left my mouth, I saw something snap in my father's eyes, something dark and volatile, something that told me he had reached his breaking point, that there was no longer any room for reason, for discussion, for pretending that any of this could still be salvaged. His face twisted in rage, his hands shaking, his breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts as he lifted one of those hands, his palm open, his fingers curled just slightly, just enough to let me know what was coming next. For a brief second I thought he might actually do it. For a brief second I thought he might actually hit me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of fear cross my face. Instead, I held his gaze, steady, unwavering, my own expression carefully blank as I tilted my chin up just slightly and said the words I knew would land deeper than any slap across the face ever could. "Go ahead," I murmured, my voice quiet but filled with the kind of steel that had been forged from years of being treated like I was less than. "You already hit me where it hurts." The silence that followed was absolute. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. The days after the confrontation felt strangely quiet, like the world had shifted slightly, like I had been living in the middle of a storm for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand in silence, to breathe air that wasn't thick with resentment, to exist without the weight of their expectations pressing down on my chest. I didn't hear from them at first, didn't get the immediate flood of phone calls and messages I had expected, didn't receive the guilt-ridden pleas or the self-righteous demands for an apology that I knew were inevitable. Instead, there was only silence, and for the first time in my life, I let myself enjoy it. I went about my days without checking my phone every few minutes, without bracing myself for the next passive-aggressive comment, without feeling the constant need to prove something to people who had never really seen me as anything more than a supporting character in the story of their lives. I woke up in the morning and made my coffee without rushing, took my time reading the news, went on walks without feeling the crushing weight of obligation pushing me forward. I didn't realize how exhausted I had been, how drained I had felt after years of bending over backward to make them happy, until the exhaustion was suddenly gone, replaced with something lighter, something I wasn't sure I had ever truly felt before. But of course, the silence couldn't last forever. It was my mother who broke it first, calling late one night after I had just settled into bed. Her name lighting up my screen like a warning, like a reminder that no matter how much I tried to remove myself from them, they would always find a way to pull me back in. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice steady, detached, unwilling to give her even the smallest indication that I had been waiting for this moment. "Ethan," she breathed, and I could tell she had been crying, could hear the emotion thick in her voice, could practically picture her sitting at the kitchen table with a tissue clenched in her fist, her eyes red and swollen, her hands trembling as she reached for another glass of wine to steady herself. "Ethan, honey, please, we need to talk." I didn't say anything right away, letting the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle in, for her to start fidgeting on the other end of the line, for her to realize that she wasn't going to get the response she wanted. "What is there to talk about?" I finally asked, keeping my tone even, distant, letting her know without saying it outright that I wasn't interested in playing along this time, that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me the way she always had. She let out a shaky breath, and I could almost hear the way she was twisting her wedding ring around her finger, the nervous habit she had developed whenever she was about to say something she knew wouldn't land well. "Your father is furious," she said softly, like that was supposed to mean something to me, like I was supposed to care. "He's saying things he doesn't mean, Ethan. He's upset, and I know you are too, but this has gone too far." I scoffed, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me, biting back the laugh that threatened to spill out because of course this was how she saw it. Not as a consequence of their actions, not as the inevitable result of years of neglect, not as the moment I had finally stood up for myself and walked away. No, to her, this was just an argument, just another petty fight between family members who would eventually get over it, just another temporary disagreement that would be swept under the rug like everything else. "I don't think it's gone far enough," I said simply, adjusting my pillow and leaning back against the headboard, making myself comfortable because I knew this conversation wasn't going to end anytime soon. She let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh, like she couldn't quite wrap her head around the fact that I wasn't backing down, like she had spent so many years believing that I would always come crawling back that she had never even considered the possibility that one day I might not. "Ethan, sweetheart," she tried again, her voice taking on that soft, pleading tone that had always worked on me when I was younger, that had always made me cave, that had always made me believe she actually cared. "I know you're hurt, but family is family. You don't turn your back on the people who love you." I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the weight of her words settle in my chest, feeling the familiar sting of disappointment, of frustration, of the absolute certainty that she would never truly understand what she had done. And then, with the calmest voice I had ever used in my life, I finally told her the truth. "No," I said, my voice steady, unshakable. "Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. And you lost mine." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I thought she might actually hear me, that she might actually listen for once, that she might finally understand why I had walked away, why I wasn't coming back, why this wasn't something that could be fixed with a half-hearted apology and an empty promise to do better. But then she let out a sharp, wounded gasp, and I knew that nothing had changed. "You don't mean that," she whispered, her voice trembling, her breath coming in uneven bursts like she was trying to hold back another round of tears. "Ethan, please don't do this. Your father—" "I don't care," I interrupted, my patience finally snapping, my voice coming out sharper than I had intended, harsher, filled with years of bottled-up resentment that I refused to keep swallowing down. "I don't care what he thinks. I don't care that he's angry. I don't care that you're upset. I don't care about fixing this, because there is nothing left to fix." There was another long stretch of silence, heavier this time, suffocating, filled with all the things she wanted to say but knew wouldn't change a damn thing. And then, after what felt like an eternity, she exhaled shakily and spoke again, her voice quiet, broken, defeated. "Then I guess this is it," she murmured, like she still couldn't believe it, like she still thought there was a chance I would take it all back. "Your father. He says you're not welcome here anymore." I nodded to myself, absorbing the words, letting them settle, letting them sink in completely. And then, for the first time in my life, I smiled. "Good," I said simply, before hanging up the phone and letting the silence return. 1 year later, I found a letter waiting in my mailbox, the handwriting on the envelope immediately recognizable, the edges of the paper slightly crumpled like whoever had sent it had hesitated before sealing it shut. I didn't open it right away, just stood there on my porch, staring at my name scrawled across the front, my fingers tightening around the paper as I debated whether or not I even wanted to know what was inside. But then curiosity got the better of me, and with careful, deliberate movements, I unfolded the letter and read the first line. "I need to talk. It's important." It was from Lily. I sat at the small table in the corner of the quiet cafe, my fingers drumming absent-mindedly against the wooden surface, my eyes fixed on the entrance as I waited for Lily to arrive. The letter she had sent had been sitting on my kitchen counter for weeks before I finally convinced myself to open it, and even then, I had almost tossed it in the trash after reading the first few lines. But curiosity had won out in the end, dragging me here against my better judgment, making me wonder what could have possibly changed so much that she had felt the need to reach out after a year of silence. The Lily I had known my entire life wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have reached out to me unless she had something to gain, unless she had been pushed into a corner with nowhere else to turn. That thought alone was enough to keep my guard up, to remind myself that just because she wanted to talk didn't mean I owed her anything, didn't mean I was suddenly ready to forget the years of resentment, the years of being cast aside in favor of her every whim. The bell above the door chimed, and when I looked up, I barely recognized the person who walked in. Lily had always been effortlessly put together, always the type to glide through life with that easy confidence of someone who had never truly faced consequences, never truly known what it meant to struggle. But the woman standing in front of me now wasn't the Lily I had grown up with, wasn't the Lily who had smirked at me from first class, who had called to rub salt in the wound after taking my place on the trip I had paid for. This Lily looked exhausted, her once perfectly styled hair now tied back in a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes lacking the usual effortless luxury she had once draped herself in without a second thought. For the first time in her life, Lily looked small. She spotted me, hesitated for only a moment, then made her way over to the table, sliding into the seat across from me without saying a word. For a long time, neither of us spoke, the weight of everything unspoken sitting between us like a physical thing, something neither of us quite knew how to address. Finally, she let out a quiet breath, her fingers toying with the edge of the napkin in front of her. her eyes darting down before meeting mine with an expression I couldn't quite place. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it, missing that usual sharp edge that had always been present when she spoke to me. I didn't respond right away, just leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest as I studied her carefully, waiting to see what she would do, waiting to hear what excuse she had come up with, what justification she had for reaching out now after a lifetime of pretending I didn't matter. "What do you want, Lily?" I finally asked, my voice even, controlled, refusing to give her any more power in this situation than she already had. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the napkin before she exhaled and leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table, looking at me with something dangerously close to regret. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine like she was looking for some sign that I would actually listen, that I wouldn't just walk away before she had the chance to say whatever it was that had brought her here. "After the trip, everything changed." I raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "I'm sure it did," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm, unwilling to make this easy for her. "Getting detained at the airport, losing all that money, having your little vacation ruined? Yeah, I'd imagine things weren't quite the fairy tale you expected." She flinched at that, like she had been expecting the hostility but still wasn't quite prepared for the bite behind my words. "That's not what I mean," she said, shaking her head slightly. "I mean, after everything fell apart after we got home, Mom and Dad turned on me. That caught me off guard, though I didn't let it show." Lily let out a hollow laugh, running a hand through her hair, her fingers tangling in the strands before she dropped them back onto the table with a tired sigh. "They blamed me for everything," she admitted, her voice tinged with something that almost sounded like disbelief, like she still couldn't quite believe it herself. "For taking the trip, for the money, for the embarrassment, for all of it. They acted like I was the one who had made the decisions, like I was the one who had set everything in motion, like I was the one who had ruined everything. And when I tried to tell them that they were the ones who made the choice to leave you behind, that they were the ones who decided I deserved it more, they just—" She broke off, shaking her head, exhaling sharply. "They didn't want to hear it." I stayed silent, letting her talk, letting her tell me all the things I had already suspected, letting her finally see the side of them I had been dealing with for years. "I thought I was their favorite," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost as if she was ashamed to say it out loud. "I thought that no matter what happened, they would always be on my side, that they would always take care of me, that I was the one they would never turn against." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head slightly as I finally met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "You were," I said simply, watching as her face twisted in something close to pain. "Until you weren't." She swallowed hard, nodding slightly, her hands tightening into fists in her lap. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice more genuine than I had ever heard it before. "For everything. For taking that trip, for the way I treated you, for all of it. I didn't see it before, I didn't realize how bad it was, I didn't." She stopped herself, biting her lip before looking at me again. "I should have stood up for you. I should have seen it before it happened to me." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face before shaking my head. "You only care now because you're in my position," I said bluntly, watching as she flinched at the words. "You only see it now because it's happening to you." She didn't try to argue, didn't try to deny it, just looked down at the table, her fingers tightening around something she had been holding in her lap. Then, after a long pause, she slid an envelope across the table toward me, her eyes unreadable. "Just read it," she said quietly. I hesitated for only a moment before reaching out and taking it, the weight of it heavier than it should have been, like whatever was inside was about to change everything. I sat there in the dim light of the cafe, the envelope resting in my hands like a weight heavier than it had any right to be, my fingers tracing the rough edges of the paper as I debated whether or not I even wanted to know what was inside. Lily sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly together, her shoulders tense, her face unreadable, though I could see the way her jaw clenched slightly, the way her gaze flickered between me and the envelope, as if she was waiting for me to react, waiting for me to open it and see whatever truth she had just placed into my hands. But I didn't rush, didn't let the curiosity get the best of me, didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me scramble for answers, because I already had a feeling I knew what this was about, already suspected that whatever was written inside would only confirm what I had been hoping for since the moment I set my plan in motion. Finally, after a long moment of silence, I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open, unfolding the letter inside with careful, deliberate movements, my eyes scanning the words printed on the page, taking in every carefully chosen sentence, every desperate plea hidden beneath the formal wording, every last detail of the disaster my parents had walked straight into without even realizing they were being led there. The number stood out first, the total amount owed sitting at the bottom of the page like a signature on their downfall, an undeniable confirmation that they had finally, been forced to deal with the consequences of their own actions. They had lost everything. Between the unpaid fines from the airport detainment, the exorbitant charges from the fake tour upgrades, the premium wine club membership that had drained their accounts faster than they could cancel it, and the hotel fiasco that had cost them thousands just to find last-minute accommodations, their finances had crumbled completely. My father, ever the prideful man, had tried to handle it on his own, had refused to acknowledge just how deep they had sunk until it was too late, had tried to juggle the debts and the bills and the mounting expenses without admitting that he had no way out. And then, when reality had finally come crashing down, when the money had run out, when the credit cards had been declined too many times, when the bank had made its final call, they had done the only thing they had ever known how to do. They had turned to me. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head as I leaned back in my chair, my fingers still gripping the letter, my mind already piecing together the scene I knew had played out behind closed doors. My father pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, his fists clenched, his pride shattered, his anger simmering just beneath the surface as he tried to figure out how this had happened, how he, of all people, had been reduced to this. My mother, sitting at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she flipped through unpaid bills, her voice breaking as she tried to convince herself that everything would be okay, that there had to be a way out, that there was no possible way their perfect little world had actually collapsed. And then the inevitable realization, the quiet moment where it finally hit them, where they finally understood that there was only one person left who could pull them out of the mess they had created. Lily watched me closely, waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to be the same person I had always been, the same son, the same brother, the same idiot who had spent his entire life trying to earn the love and respect of people who had never truly valued him. But I wasn't that person anymore. Wasn't the kid who had stayed up late studying for perfect grades only to be met with half-hearted praise. Wasn't the young man who had worked himself to exhaustion trying to be the responsible one while Lily coasted by without a care in the world. Wasn't the afterthought who had gifted them the trip of a lifetime only to be tossed aside the moment it became more convenient for them. I wasn't the one who was going to save them. I folded the letter neatly, set it down on the table, and looked up at Lily, meeting her gaze with a calmness that I knew was unsettling, with a certainty that left no room for doubt. No room for second chances, no room for anything but the cold, simple truth. Are they sorry? I asked, my voice even, unwavering, steady. Or are they just desperate? Lily's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, as if she wanted to insist that this was different, that they had changed, that they finally understood what they had done. But the words never came, the excuse never left her mouth because she knew, that I wouldn't believe her even if she tried. She knew the answer. And she knew I did too. She didn't say anything, didn't try to fight it, didn't try to twist the truth into something more palatable, more digestible, more comforting. Instead, she just sat there, silent, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, her throat bobbing slightly as she swallowed down whatever lie she had been prepared to tell. And that silence was all I needed. I reached out, took the envelope, slid it into my pocket without another word, then pushed back my chair and stood, stretching my arms slightly before glancing down at her one last time. She looked up at me, something desperate in her eyes, something that might have been regret, something that might have been understanding, something that might have been the painful realization that I wasn't her safety net any more than I was theirs. She had come here hoping for a different ending, hoping for some final act of forgiveness, hoping that after everything, I would still be the person who caved, the person who fixed things, the person who cleaned up the mess. But I wasn't, and I never would be again. Without another word, without a second glance, without even a flicker of hesitation, I turned and walked away, stepping out into the cold evening air, letting the weight of the past finally fall away as I left it all behind. For the first time in my life I felt free. For the first time in my life I owed them nothing. And as I walked away, my hands tucked into my pockets, my head held high, I allowed myself the smallest, quietest, most satisfied smile. Revenge. Well, I just gave them exactly what they gave me. Nothing.